they're seeing more pressure from the consumer demand than they're seeing in the holiday season. So it really speaks to kind of what they're solving for. And I think traditionally our e-commerce business is around 35% of our revenue, and it's tracking 50% plus. So again, no surprise, everyone's at home and wants everything delivered tomorrow. And industrial is kind of the darling child, I would say, of commercial real estate right now. So that's really what we're seeing from an industry standpoint. I think the evolution of the conversation, the first month or two was very much around rent abatement and how is everyone working from home. I think that shifted to planning for reentry over the past couple months. And what we're seeing is the bigger the user, the kind of less agile they are to re-enter. So I think we're seeing those dates continue to slip, probably due to the increase in cases, but also just their ability to mobilize and get people back in the office. Where if you're a smaller user, and I know we're seeing it in our market, it's a little easier for them to come back into the market. I feel like just now in the past couple of weeks, that conversation has taken another turn. And in talking to clients and prospects, again, not just here in this market, but across the country, the question more is, when am I going to see a deal? If I do have a lease expiration in the next 12 or 15 months, when's the price, going to drop to the point where there's a discount? And I think in general, especially here, we haven't quite seen that yet, especially on the face rates. We have some markets that we're starting to see a larger discount, but in general, I think the last stat we saw across the country, it was still a single digit price discount on face rate. So I don't think it's as big as typical user is used to seeing. So a lot of conversations of reminding them that historically the commercial real estate market lags the economy by 6 to 9 months. We all know that everything that we're dealing with right now is unprecedented. So time will tell if that really holds up. But it's when's the price correction coming? And now it's, if you are in a position you're either building a building, you're in the middle of renovating your space, what should they be building for? So what does that workplace of the future really look like? What investments are companies really needing to do? And I think a lot of our responses have been very honest, which is we don't know yet, even at JLL, and anyone that tries to tell you that they know what you should be building is probably guessing. So again, a lot of those conversations of just really taking note with our workplace strategy and occupancy experts across the country who are continuing to talk to big users to kind of get sentiment on what their employees are kind of telling them. I think the biggest thing we're seeing that's going to come out of this is employees want flexibility. So you're going to have people that want to work from home and come into the office, and really helping clients understand, take a step back before you even look at what your square footage and design is. And let's all ask ourselves, what's the purpose and the function that our office space should be performing for your individual company? So I think that's a lot of conversations companies are starting to have, and probably ones we haven't had in the past has very much just been people in the office. We have to have desks, workstations, and offices. But I think you're going to see a lot more of those conversations, and that will then in turn define, what a square footage footprint looks like, how many offices, et cetera, look like going forward.
Great. Thank you, Kimarie. I want to go back to how the industrial life science industries are doing in our market. And Deb, I think you're the best person to speak on this. Deb, can you put a microscope on RTP for us really quickly? RTP has always been a hotbed for the life science industry. And since you predominantly focus on life sciences and tech and lab users, how are they performing under this current climate?
So that's a great question. And, it's really interesting to see this industry get a lot more spotlight, a lot more attention because of COVID. And again, life sciences is so much more of a recognizable, industry to the average person that, didn't have that visibility before. So it has been an interesting thing. We're kind of like this little boutique specialty that's suddenly in the spotlight. But, when I checked this morning, I'm going to back up just a little bit to give you some context for kind of where I can dive in. There's definitely a race for, COVID vaccine. And when I checked this morning, there's like 37 vaccines in human trials, and there's over 165, vaccine hopes, in the pipeline. And one thing to think about too is that it's not just about a vaccine. It's really about treatments as well, because, you guys probably have this experience with like a flu shot, right? Like the vaccine that's being developed right now might not provide the same protection against the virus we experience next year. So, this isn't just a now thing. This is, really something that is going to stay with us for several years, especially when you consider typical vaccine developments take multiple years to do. We're throwing a lot of gasoline on the fire right now to accelerate it, which is good. But, this is going to be a prolonged, specific impact on the industry. But, the other thing is that it's also drug treatments. It's not just a vaccine, and also innovative devices and technologies to help mitigate exposure and transmission risks. So just kind of thinking a little bit bigger than just a shot and a fill finish facility that's going to be able to, spew out 1 million of these, pre-filled syringes. It's going to be even, kind of people talk about the HVAC systems in office buildings, and that kind of technology. So all of those things are going to come together and be, kind of part of the solution. And I share that to say that specifically to Triangle, and nationwide, nearly all life science companies are examining the pipeline and even their previously shelved compounds to see if there's any applicability to respiratory treatments or the other debilitating symptoms of COVID, like, the blood clotting and stuff like that. So, kind of the interesting and related nuance is that capital is flowing into later and expansion stage life science companies. Like in Q1 2020, we were well above the long-term average, but early stage ventures that, vital to like the youngest life science companies saw a steep decline in Q1 2020. So kind of going back to my previous comment, existing companies that are looking at their technology to see if, anything they have could be pivoted to address COVID, they're kind of getting this boost. However, companies starting from scratch to pursue COVID cures are having a much more challenging fundraising condition. And then again, kind of that relates to the Triangle, because keep in mind, the Triangle's 3 major research universities here bring in millions of funding dollars from the National Institutes of Health. So similar to VC funding and investment, the NIH funding in Q1 2020 had already, exceeded 37% of the previous year's quarter. So like in May, I think the top 11 kind of science markets in the country had attracted nearly half of the funding from NIH, and we were actually number 4. So like by the first 125 days of this year, we were awarded $442 million in NIH funding. So again, that's one of those things where, because we have those research universities, that's an additional bucket of money that's different than, commercial VC money or private equity coming into. So it helps give us some diversity. So back to your original question, kind of just about how COVID's affecting sort of lab space in our market, is that, there's definitely COVID R&D going on right here in our backyard, but, it's probably affecting the needs, and it's definitely affecting the needs for lab space, but many of these companies already have a footprint, right? They exist and they're re-looking at, kind of, again, their shelf of like, oh my gosh, could we get some NIH grant money in order to, this thing that we didn't work for our original intent, right? And so like that brings me to another point, which is supply in this market. And there isn't any for ready to go lab space, i.e. we can expand right now because we're pursuing this science right now for COVID stuff, because, basically that's kind of blown up in the last, 6 months, right? Call it. But the good news to that is that, that's going to be changing very soon. Longfellow, Alexandria, TPG, Trinity Starwood, and others are all speculatively building out space. So we're about to, have some relief on that. And I think then naturally you're going to have some of these companies that have been, you know what, let's just pack it in, let's do what we can do, you know, for the good of COVID and development, we're going to just run 2 shifts, all that kind of stuff. They will organically kind of expand, as well as some new companies, right? And so that kind of leads me to like my one cautionary note regarding life science real estate specifically, particularly for like would-be developers, because life science has become one of the hot trends in real estate due to the fact that it's been largely unaffected by the pandemic. But if you dig deeper, what's really happening is that life science companies are steadily holding course with, you know, with a little extra activity from COVID, sure. But, you know, in the triangle, there's a lot of new product that's about to come online. And furthermore, you know, life science space has a really steep learning curve. It's highly technical. It has a lot to incorporate when you want to consider the reusability of the asset. And, you know, the tenants, depending on their size, tend to be riskier credit with, you know, really high, you know, needs for tenant improvement dollars on top of their own out-of-pocket contribution. So the, you know, the bottom line is you just really need to know what you're doing before you jump in. That being said, as a tenant rep, I love options and I love landlords competing. So
Right.
It's a good thing.
Right. Yeah. So that was going to kind of segue into my next question. Like, I wanted you to maybe touch on like these recent deals and developments in RTP, particularly the one that's at the top of everybody's mind right now is the Grail deal that just got done at 200,000 square feet at Park Point. I mean, it's remarkable. And I think that it's really encouraging, and it says something about, you know, our activity and just the health of RTP in general.
Well, so, and I think this is it's an interesting answer because it actually doesn't have anything to do with COVID, which is good, I think, for us. It's not just like a one-time thing, even though we know it's going to, you know, COVID's, the implications are with us for a while. You know, a different trend that we're seeing in the triangle is what you just touched on, and it precedes COVID, and it's the increase in sort of the large gene therapy and pharmaceutical manufacturing projects that are here and in the surrounding, the greater triangle area. You've got Pfizer's gene therapy facility, Lilly's gene therapy manufacturing campus, Audente's chose Sanford, you know, that's a Bay Area headquartered gene therapy group. They chose Sanford for their gene therapy facility with plans to expand very soon. You know, Grail Therapeutics selection of Park Point for their commercial scale liquid biopsy testing center was interesting because, you know, again, it's a Bay Area based company. It's where they, you know, the VC money, et cetera, is and the connections are very dense and where, again, it was founded, but they just didn't have, you know, the right ingredients there to do a 200,000 square foot commercial, you know, kind of the fulfillment of all of these tests that they do. You know, it's like they can test for 50 different cancers or something.
Yeah.
So, you know, and this group, I don't have to tell you why all those guys, you know, picked this, right? Cost of living, all that other stuff, talented workforce. But I think the point that's interesting about these larger groups, like Grail, you know, like, you know, Audente's and stuff, is that they're out of town looking at our area and selecting us for these larger kind of big box, you know, build your whole, you know, kind of commercial project inside the box. So, you know, and there's several others circling. I mean, there's a lot, and they tend to be multi-market searches that ultimately select the triangle area. So what, you know, while not directly related to COVID, I think it's great news for, you know, kind of the triangle's life science ecosystem.
Great, agreed. So do you think that tenant reentry looks different for lab users and life science users than it does for office based on what you've seen lately? And Kimarie, Sara, y'all feel free to chime in here as well on this.
Yeah, my initial reaction is, you know, yes and no, which is a non-answer, sorry. But, you know, in some ways there's no re-entry because the labs and the manufacturing never shut down. So, you know, again, you can't lab from home. So life science companies had to quickly develop protocols to keep their employees safe, but also keep critical and often, you know, life-saving operations running. You know, and I'll give you an example. So some companies that don't typically run shifts, you know, shifts tend to be a little bit more kind of hourly workers, et cetera, in some of these facilities and not where you have PhD scientists, et cetera. They resorted to doing shift work so that they could have a dramatically reduced capacity at any one given time in their facility, but they didn't shut their labs down. They were still shipping, the research or the development out, particularly like the CROs or the contract workers, because again, the big pharma is using them and making sure that stuff, stays on schedule. Much thought has been given to the circulation flow in the lab, but it's similar to office, right? And basically trying to minimize close contact and, where aerosolized breath can be shared. But other than that, fundamentally, a lot of life science and a lot of labs are single pass air, which is like the best case scenario, that all of, kind of that contagious, exhalation is getting sucked out of the building. So, that's kind of what we're seeing, that a lot of it is really similar to office, although kind of little variations.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, and I wouldn't add anything to that other than, just a stat from talking to one of our national kind of location advisory people. And so I was connecting with him yesterday, and not knowing, given he works on a lot of multi-search projects, and thinking that a lot of those probably would be dead right now. And he said he was actually slammed, but he said 80% of his active projects right now are life science manufacturing. So again, confirms everything that Deb just said, but just further confirmation that that's where a lot of the energy and investment is right now, even across the country.
Okay. Interesting. Well, I want to pivot over to Sara, since we're talking about reentry here. Sara will give us a really good landlord perspective. You work with Highwoods. They're a huge REIT. You've got a presence in 10 different markets across the U.S. And in the state, they effectively shut down. It shut down on March 13th when they issued the mandatory stay-at-home order.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that happened, what was the kind of initial reaction from your tenants and customers there?
So we had a pretty quick reaction from the limited amount of retail customers that we have, our restaurants mainly. And it was actually in North Carolina, and it went in different stages in different states. Schools, I think, started shutting down on the 13th. The governor actually issued his order on the 27th. And I looked back at my notes last night and getting ready for this. We had our first rent relief call on March 19th. So it was before the governor's order. As things started going down, we started getting calls. And we've really tried to approach it from a need-based review of those requests. We had a lot of customers come right out and ask for it immediately. And so we came up with a process for people to go through for us to really evaluate what their needs were, so that we could make sure we were helping those that needed it, and asking our other customers who were requesting relief to really look at whether they needed relief or not. And we got a good response from our tenants, as far as those that said, no, I can wait, I don't really need it. We were just seeing what was out there, versus those that wouldn't survive without some assistance. The PPP program came in pretty quickly in all of the shutdowns, and we did ask our rent relief customers to apply for PPP if they could get it, and to use the money as it was intended, which is for payroll, but also some of that money could be used for rent, utilities, mortgage payments, and still be forgiven under the federal program. And the federal program actually increased the percentage that PPP could be used for rent, utilities, mortgage, and operating expenses. And so, again, we had our customers have a good response to that applied, that received it. What we've done in some cases is shift the relief if they have used up their PPP money and are still hurting, and shift any relief that we are giving. We also asked clients to look at their long-term plans. So was this an immediate need, but they are planning to stay in their offices long-term, and did they want an extension in connection with any relief? And that was a good solution for both Highwoods and our customers in a lot of situations. Some just needed the immediate relief, particularly the restaurants. We've had our medical office, so a little bit different than Deb's life science, but I think medical has definitely been different for us for an occupancy perspective, that they have remained operating to a greater extent than general office, and they are coming back at a greater capacity right now than general office as we look to reentry. And in positive news on rent relief, we were having a daily call at Highwoods on rent relief through the end of June, which we have now transitioned to a twice weekly call on rent relief. So that is an indication of the speed of requests, which I think is a positive. And we are really monitoring our accounts receivable and just making sure we are staying in touch with our customers at this point. So we're kind of ahead of the game if they start seeing trouble on the horizon that is going to need to be addressed.
Have you seen any tenant bankruptcies and tenants just turning out their lights? What is that? Can you give me a ratio or a number or percentage there?
We have had very few that have just said, I'm out. We did have a couple, but I think as a landlord, you get that in good times and bad. So it was really just a couple of those. What has started and what I think that we will likely see more of is bankruptcies. Bankruptcy filings have ticked up in the last 30 days. So, and it's not our rent relief customers that are filing bankruptcy. It's those that we didn't hear from rent relief. And to me, that's an indicator that their business was in trouble pre-COVID, and is not going to make it through without bankruptcy assistance. And we are seeing Chapter 11 bankruptcy filings so far. I haven't really seen 7, which is the liquidation. 11 is the reorganization of a company and debt restructuring. So hopefully that continues. But in bankruptcy, obviously they can reject leases, they can assume leases. It just gives them more flexibility. I think that is what we will see more of as we move forward in this, just the general economic stress that this has put on companies that just isn't quickly solved by deferring payments for a little while.
So as a whole, are you seeing a lot more short-term requests than long-term? Because on my side, we're seeing kind of a mixed bag. You have people that are trying to buy time, and we're looking at leases that are 12 to 18 months out, sometimes even 2 years, to try to focus on early renewals to get people take advantage of, I guess, rent abatement package or incentives that the landlord will offer. But what are you seeing? Are you seeing more short-term leases where they're trying to buy time, or are you seeing people that are maybe willing to lock into a longer term to get a heftier incentive package from their landlord?
So it's kind of a combination, which isn't probably the best answer. I think with expirations through 21, where we are seeing more short-term extensions than we are anything else. We have also seen, though, in connection with rent relief requests, where we have negotiated very long-term extensions, and really that's, if we've got a lease expiring in 26 or 27, maybe we're taking it out to 29 or 30. So it's shorter term, but on the back end, and really pushes that lease out. So we've seen a combination of those. And I will say it has not been dead quiet as far as new deals either. I mean, those are still coming in, obviously, at a slower pace. But it's kind of relatively normal terms if a new lease is coming in. And we've also seen a lot of activity from the federal government in leasing as well, and very long-term leases with them.
Okay, interesting. Kimarie, Deb, are you guys seeing the same thing? Are you asking for the same thing on behalf of your client? I mean, when it sounds like it's really just a case-by-case basis on kind of what position the tenant is in and how comfortable they are and strong they are as a company, right?
I can speak for, again, the life science tenants, that I don't think I've had any ask for any sort of rent relief. I mean, we have maybe one situation where they've contemplated, we've discussed potentially asking for a short-term, kind of kick on, because the new space that they're building, an owned, manufacturing facility, may run into supply chain issues relative to getting some of the long lead equipment pieces in, like that kind of situation. But it's not, they're going to pay. It's not an issue of that paying side. And I don't think I've had any other clients ask. Again, when it first happened, people kind of like kicked the tires a little bit just to see, but I would say even, very few of them, and I don't know what the percentages that have taken PPP money, but I do know some that were planning to, and then they actually pulled back off of it, just to be, kind of very, very conservative relative to the testing, and kind of a, did you really need it kind of a question. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And the one thing that I would say that maybe is related to that is that, again, when you're in the drug development world, like you're taking 12 years to get a drug to market where you actually sell it and make money, right? So you're not planning to have revenue to pay your rent the next month to, like a restaurant, a retail, or something like that. So I guess fundamentally, like the DNA of life science companies is such that, it's very long term, and this immediate impact, while it's severe to the global economy, et cetera, I don't know that they're not necessarily unprepared to continue to pay rent, for better or worse, right? We can't really legitimately look you straight in the face and say that we need that rent relief more than, again, the restaurant.
Right.
Yeah, and I would say from the office side of things, we really haven't seen the rent abatement, rent relief conversation in a while. It's really been more about, if I've got to make a leasing decision, how much of a discount am I going to get from a landlord? And if it's not that much off of quoted rate or what it was 6 months ago, I'm probably just going to do something short term. There's not enough incentive for me to do something long term right now. So I know, sorry, my little guy just walked in here. But in general, I think that's what we're seeing from the office user standpoint, which, Sara, I was curious, obviously when people started asking for rent relief, a few weeks into this, we all thought it was only going to last 2 or 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly it's lasting a lot longer. I mean,
Yes.
Have you found people are just like moved on to something else, or do you have some of those people are coming back? Because I think if we all knew this was going to last 6 months, people would have asked for more than a month or two.
Right. We did have some requests that said, hey, we need rent relief for 12 months, or we need rent relief through 2020. And they were asking that in March and early April. And I think I know that our response was, none of us knows where this is going. We're reasonable, you're reasonable. Let's deal with this a couple months at a time, 3 months at a time, and revisit. And if you still don't have your feet under you, are unable to get your feet under you because this is continuing, then let's visit it again. And so we are having second rounds right now of our tenants coming back in some situations, but I think my crystal ball is awfully fuzzy as to when this starts to normalize. And so I think the plan is to continue to deal with it in increments that we can somewhat predict.
Yeah, and I think, from the landlord standpoint, curious to Hastings and Sara, I think some of the commentary we've given to clients is landlords might not want to come off rental rates, but when the pressure starts coming from their lenders, that's where things might kind of shift a little bit. So just curious, what kind of the sentiment is, and some of the lenders that you guys work with, they might be the ones that force the hand of maybe some more aggressive pricing.
So unfortunately, I'm probably not the best person to answer that question. Highwoods does not have a lot of secured financing. So our properties are mostly unencumbered. So we actually are pretty unencumbered as well, as far as how we can deal with our customers. I'm sure that as far as covenants for lending that I do usually see, they will start getting pressure to have a certain amount of NOI, to have a certain amount of occupancy in their buildings in order to meet the covenants in the loans. So I think short-term extensions will continue to be the name of the game for a little bit, as everybody tries to figure out how this is going to work so that people can keep up with their loan covenants that need to deal with them.
In my opinion there, I mean, I think that our market is still strong. We're feeling bullish about the market. There's a slowdown. We're obviously crippled because we're in a pandemic right now, but from a rate standpoint, we aren't really talking with my clients about coming down on these rates yet. I don't think that there are any plans to do so, because really that rate it's tied to so many different things. Construction pricing, for example, that's not going down anytime soon. You've got to make the stars align there. So that's kind of my short answer there. We're feeling good-ish. We want to get out of the dark so we can kind of see, you know, what 2021, 2022 is going to look like. But I think that cutting our rates right now is not, it seems a bit impulsive, and it'll make the deal economics much harder, just given the other numbers that go into getting a deal done.
And I think it's so deal specific right now. What market is it in? What building is it in? What space is it in? What customer is coming and asking? And that will drive some of the rate discussion. I think that, kind of to Hastings' point, I think that we will see more shorter term extensions than we will reductions in rate right now. That is just my guess, just because everybody's guessing right now as to how this plays out.
Yeah, and that's, I'm sure, Deb, you not as much on the life science, but that's the hardest conversation to have with clients right now on the tenant side, because they read the news and, you know, unemployment's X and the sky is falling and everyone's working from home. And so I think they feel like, you know, the pricing should be adjusted accordingly. And so it's kind of differing signals that they're getting, and it's hard for them to digest what that means.
Yeah, especially when you're looking at national news and then realizing that we're a little bit of a bubble, and that's why people want to move here, et cetera. And it's good for their business, right, ultimately, but not great for their like bargain hunting real estate desires.
Well, I'd like to kind of shift and talk about, you know, Highwoods, for example. What are you guys are doing to create like a healthier and safer workplace for these tenants, you know?
So we, as soon as any of our markets started coming out of stay-at-home orders, really entering phase one, we had a pretty comprehensive plan as to how our buildings would be handled. We are updating all the HEPA filters to the highest grade that we can for all of our HVAC systems. We have hand sanitizing stations. We have CDC recommended cleaning. And we've been doing that through the stay-at-home orders as well, because property management was an essential business and many of our tenants were essential businesses. So they were operating the whole time and our buildings were open the whole time. So we accelerated our signage and the hand sanitizing and that type of thing, communications to our customers as we came out of stay at home. But really we started doing the enhanced cleaning as this pandemic was starting, before stay at home orders, and then definitely during stay at home orders. And we continue it if there are any exposures in our building. We ask our customers to let us know if they have any employees that have tested positive, so that we can clean common areas, we can clean the suite that the affected person was occupying at an even higher standard than the already CDC recommended guidelines after someone is tested positive for COVID. So we continue all of that. We have communicated pretty regularly with our customers as far as what we're asking them to do, which is water in your suite that hasn't been used in a long time, and how it should be flushed out, to communicate as far as their return to the office plans, so that we can make sure we are aware of what's going on and assist any of their employees that might have some anxiety about returning to the office. We're also doing that with our Highwoods offices. We constantly look at it. We had a plan for returning to the office, even though our techs and property managers were there the whole time. People like me who are non-essential for operating the buildings have been working remotely. And so trying to manage that and trying to be a leader in getting back to the office, because we think it can be done in a way that is safe. And we've tried to structure our return as an example of a way that we feel like it can be done safely based on the science as we know it now. And it's like an experiment in real time. So we're doing the best we can with the information that is currently available, and we look at it constantly.
Kimarie and Deb, is there anything that you guys are asking on the client's behalf? Just generally speaking, on new deals and renewals, for, I guess, your tenant and client safety?
Yeah, I mean, I non-answer. I think it's still kind of up in the air. It's, there's companies are going to have to weigh how much money do they invest in some health and wellness precautions today that might be have a higher price tag. That in 12 months, if we have a vaccine and we've got better treatments, those kind of go by the wayside. So I still think you've got some companies that, aside from doing the, masks and sanitizers and having a day porter every day wipe down your space. We have that in our office. I think they come and wipe down our door every 20 minutes. I know Mike and Patty and a few people are on here. I feel like we should make friends with that person. But I still think it's kind of a little bit of a wait and see mode, because it becomes down what's the ROI and how much investment are you going to shell out today for something that might be obsolete in 12 months. And I think that's probably why you see some bigger companies extending their re-entry into 21, because they would rather just kind of, again, let another 6 or 9 months play out, keep everyone safe at home, rather than trying to rush everyone back and spend thousands of dollars. I think I've even heard our property management team quote, to do a deep clean, if you have a COVID positive test in your office, the numbers, Sara, you might know, they're huge. They're insurmountable, to the point where I think some companies wouldn't be able to afford it. And so I think that's in the mindset right now of people going back, is if that were to happen, it's probably a 6-7 figure, depending on your size, to shell out just to get everyone back into the space.
Yeah, I think it's a higher cost to do the kind of COVID cleaning. We also have customers that are looking at requesting to put ionizers on HVAC systems, and they are willing to invest that cost, thinking that it will be long-term. To Kimarie's point, I don't know what is long-term. Again, it's just a fuzzy crystal ball, which I don't think is a doomsday, but I do think the approach that Highwoods is trying to take is really, what is the CDC saying we should do right now? Following the CDC guidelines, following OSHA guidelines. Different states are handling it different ways. Virginia is releasing state OSHA guidelines for employers, and they will be the first in the country to issue those kinds of guidelines on top of the CDC guidelines, which are recommendations. The OSHA will be requirements. So we're trying to keep up with the recommendations of scientists, basically, and what the CDC is saying, and it changes frequently. I mean, they've updated their guidance frequently during this, and so we're staying up to date with that in order to keep our customers safe and our employees safe.
So Sara, you're telling me that you don't want tenants to require once through air in all your full service office buildings that already have the set base year, because then the electric runs like $7 or $8 plus.
We're dealing with every request.
Like, shut up! How do we keep her off the call?
We are.
Well, and the interesting thing is that most lab or life science facilities are triple net, right? So it's a little bit more under the purview and control of the tenant to do what they want to do. And again, not all labs are once through air. A lot of them recirculate because it's extremely expensive in the summer in North Carolina with our humidity to dehumidify that air and cool it brand new every single time, for multiple changes per hour. But So one, there's a little bit of autonomy there, but I told this group yesterday when we were prepping, you know, I was just coming off an office lease, and it was for a life science company, but it was an office lease, and we were, you know, the attorney's big national firm, of course, was like, well, do we want to put in all these COVID bullets about requirements for the janitorial that the landlord has to adhere to? And, you know, obviously I'm on the tenant side, but I kind of raised my hand. I'm like, you know, what you put in bullets today may not be relevant 3 months from now, or 6, you know, months from now, or 2 years, and it's a long-term lease, right? So I'm like, you know, we probably need to craft something where it's more of a holding landlords to, you know, again, a commercially reasonable level of like adhering to their, you know, kind of like what all the peers for a, you know, best in class A building, you know, is doing, because, and it's hard because that's like a very loose type of term. But I do think that there is so much thought leadership from, you know, all these real estate companies, as well as the design firms and the health, you know, leadership, that, you know, the best I think we can hope for is to hold the landlord to doing the right thing. You know, again, as a tenant rep, you don't want to say that, like, that just sounds so, how do you enforce that? But, you know.
In our prep yesterday, well, and Deb and Kimarie and Hastings, we talked about this. I mean, North Carolina has legislation that protects employers, protects landlords, it protects businesses from people suing them because they got COVID there. As long as the employer or landlord or business is being reasonable in what they are doing. And so that, I totally agree with you. It's hard to bullet point that because it's just going to be, I think, a constantly moving target for the next year, for the next 2 years.
It's a good thing for Highwoods though too, because then when you get kind of loose gray area type stuff, then the reputation of the landlord counts much more, right?
It does.
Like, are these people who for the last 2, 3, 4 decades, right, have always done the right thing, have, while their lease may say this, they always jump to this, right? And so I think that applies to life science landlords as well as, you know, office or industrial, whatever.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I'll pay you later for the little plug for Highwoods.
Well, y'all, we are running out of time, and I do just want to hit on one last thing. You know, there are these obvious culture shifts right now in the workplace. We're all working from home right now, and me in particular, you know, I've been chomping at the bit to get back in the office. You know, I miss that human interaction, the collaboration with my coworkers. I miss just getting out of the house. You know, there are just distractions around here that you can't really avoid sometimes. I do feel like I've found a balance, and it does feel nice. But I want to get y'all's take on how permanent do you think this is going to be? Do you think you're going to see a lot of companies like Nationwide just say everybody go home? Or are you going to see people like Bank of America that let's take on more space? Or are we just going to downsize and have some people work from home and some people work in the office and do this grouping thing? Also, if you could hit on what you're thinking or hearing about kind of how the younger generations like millennials are going to, what they want versus older generations, what they want. So Kimarie, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I mean, I think a few thoughts there. I do think, you know, a lot of companies that never explored a remote work policy have now realized that they can. So I think every company is going to have some sort of work remote, you know, policy in their business. I think some of the early studies that we've done nationally has been around 35% of people say they want to work from home permanently, around 15% say they want to work in the office permanently, and then 50% say they want to work in the office and at home. So I do think the biggest trend is companies are going to have to solve for that flexibility, right? To people have their own desk and to be able to work at home at the same time. As far as, you know, how permanent it's going to be, I keep holding out hope that it might take a year or two longer for it to come full circle. But I think eventually companies right now are making decisions because they're cost saving decisions. And so they're looking for every way to reduce expenses. And one of those is, let me reduce my footprint. But I think over time, just because everyone's productive at home, and I kind of laugh, when everyone says that right now, I'm like, well, business is down in most industries, so your productive and your output don't really align. So let's talk about how productive we are when everyone's has a lot of business to work on. But I do think that will come full circle, because just because you're productive doesn't mean you're happy, and doesn't mean you're engaged, and doesn't mean you're a loyal employee. So I think you're going to see executives that, again, are looking through a cost management lens right now, and over time that will shift and come back around. And I think lastly, as far as, you know, the millennial generation, I kid people, the millennial generation's turning 40. So now we've got Gen Z in the workforce. And we had our JLL toyed with, we have about 250 interns nationally that offers had been made pre-COVID. And we waited until May 15th to make the call is, are we going to keep, you know, that internship program? What does it look like? And I will admit at the beginning, I was like, well, cut it, because how bad would that be to have it be virtual? And I don't have time to manage an intern as we're trying to re-enter, but I'm glad they went ahead and did with it. It's a 4-week, 80-hour virtual program that they did with about 250 interns across the country. And 6 of them were on our team call yesterday. So we kind of flipped the script, and we're asking them how the experience has been and what they miss. And no surprise, you know, they were just fortunate to have a job experience right now, where a lot of their friends, the internships didn't turn into anything. But they all said there is nothing that compares to us not being in the room, in the office with people. So I think when you hear that from the Gen Z generation, that's going to be driving the trends going forward. And I think it's easy for an executive to look at that generation and be like, well, you do TikTok and Instagram and you don't call people and you text everyone, so of course you guys are going to be fine working from home. And I think the studies we've seen the last couple of months is the biggest population is that younger millennial group and Gen Z, which are the ones that are itching to get back into the office. And obviously they don't have kids and a lot of worry. So I think if that kind of continues, I think that will also, you know, support kind of, or kind of squash everyone's working from home, because I think eventually you're going to have enough people, especially the the future, if you will, the workforce of the future, that are kind of demanding some sort of human interaction in person.
I think that's one of the characteristics of Gen Z, Kimarie, that is starting to come out, is they are tech savvy, absolutely, but they are social. Mm-hmm. They are social activists. They are social in their lives, and that will support them wanting to interact in person. I am a Gen Xer and I have a Gen Zer at home, and it drives a lot of interesting conversation about that. So I do think it'll look a little different, but I don't think the need for an office situation goes away. I just think it looks a little different.
I think Kimarie's point, though, is really good, that I do think that this has accelerated some permanent changes relative to expectations. So I also don't think that, you know, an office footprint is ever going to go away. But I think that people's eyes have been open to what flexibility in their workday or where they're working at what times that they're not going to want to give up. So, I mean, an easy example of that in the Triangle is the fact that traffic really sucks if you're trying to get into RTP area in the morning or out of it in the evening. And so to be able to now have, you know, your whole company adopting technology that does make, you know, doing calls maybe in the morning or whatever, you know, seamless, and then you can drive in at 10 or something like that. I mean, I think that kind of flexibility is something that will not go away even after all of, you know, kind of the pandemic stuff happens. So, and I think that's a good thing, right? It's really accelerated some of those, the adoption of a lot of technology that I think was always lacking in order to legitimately and effectively have people work out of the office. So. And
I think the last point to kind of add to that is, I was talking to our broker lead of our Palo Alto office, and he made a really good point, which is the companies that are not going back right now are being very vocal about it. They're coming out and saying it in the news. And he's like, the companies that are going back are the ones that aren't being public about it. JLL has been very public about going back, but that's a different story. So I think that's worth noting as well. He's like, he mentioned a number of big tech companies in the Bay Area who he's like, I know they're going back, but they don't want to be public about it. And so right now the messaging is just the ones saying they're not going back. And so I think that's worth noting as well, that there are people going back. They don't want the backlash and the media to kind of come after them in case, they misstep or they had COVID tests, but people are going back into the market. They're just not talking about it.
Well, and one big thing is that until the schools and that whole thing gets resolved, all of this is kind of in this totally uncertain what the hell is going to happen, 2 weeks from now or 4 months from now. That is a huge, down the line impact to how you're filling up office buildings. Because if kids are back in school, your office buildings are much more likely to get filled up. But until that happens, sitting here at home.
That's what we're hearing from our larger customers. It's not so much that they don't want to return to the office. It is that there are too many variables to solve for right now. And so when those variables are solved for them with a vaccine, with school returning, with more and better therapeutics for this, then they have fewer variables to deal with and are more likely to return. It's just the larger the company, the more variables there are.
Yeah, agreed. I think schools are really going to dictate our futures, to be honest, and what reentry and workplace evolution looks like. But I think that the general outlook here, it seems pretty positive. I think after speaking with you all, they're definitely, you can see a light at the end of the tunnel. I think that, with these times, with everything being so quiet, I'm not seeing my coworkers, we're not doing all these, it's easy to get discouraged, right? And I think, having this discussion today, it contradicts a lot of assumptions that I made, to be frank, just about the market and our future. So we're feeling bullish and feeling good after speaking with you all. And I really appreciate y'all taking the time to speak with me today and supporting TRAOBA. And we're out of time. I think one person has raised their hand. Let me see if you all, I guess, do y'all have time to open it up for questions for just a second?
Sure.
Maybe 4 or 5 minutes. Chanel Hoff has asked a question. She said, Crew is working with the UNC School of Real Estate to build out content to support the commercial real estate talent pipeline. When asked about modality for delivery, in person or virtual, the overwhelming desire is to be live in front of people. Virtual is not the preference by a wide margin. And so, yeah, she's echoing what we're saying.
To Kimarie's point, we actually have an intern at Highwoods from the UNC School of Real Estate this summer. And she's with us for 5 weeks and she is in the office. And so, and that was her preference. She's excited about commercial real estate. They want to be there.
Yeah. I agree. Well, I think, it's 1:00. No one else has asked any questions. If anybody wants to squeeze something in, we can give them a minute or so. You can chat with us in the Zoom group chat. There should be an option at the bottom right hand of your screen, or in the middle. It says chat, actually.
And before we go, thanks for setting this up, Hastings, and thanks for the invitation. It was great being here.
It'll make me feel more positive as well. So I think everyone's looking for cautious optimism, but hopefully we're all taking a longer term view. And because if you do take a short term view, you'll get very discouraged.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. Well, I don't have any questions in our little chat room. I really appreciate it. Thank you all again hope y'all all have a really safe and happy summer. For sunscreen, don't get too hot. Wear your masks.
Thank you.
Y'all
Thanks,
have a
everybody.
great rest of the
Bye,
afternoon.
guys.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right, bye.